And thus it is time to embark on the final problem in this Lady Sherlock series, the coat, which, along with the hat, is probably the most iconic element to our image of Sherlock Holmes. The Inverness coat, or what also seems to, in the period, be interchangeably called the Ulster coat, was designed for both men and women, but was primarily intended as country wear. Not the most obvious choice for a Londoner, but never mind, Holmes can do what he wants. The pattern I'm working from mainly is the draft, well, a collection of drafts really, from the Keystone Guide to Jacket and Dress Cutting, which you may recognize from my previous projects on this Lady Sherlock endeavor, and which you can access for free, so I shall link that down below. Okay, so it looks like this pattern is going to be quite a complex process. It's going to be, I think, a 3-stage process, although I could be wrong. So basically, when I was looking at this, how to draft the Ulster coat, he essentially starts off as saying, start by drafting the jacket. So I had to go back to the jacket portion of the book, in which he shows how to draft just a basic jacket pattern. Then, of course, in order to get the Ulster coat, you just have to lengthen it and make a few alterations to this initial pattern. So I will be starting off with this pattern, making the alterations to turn it into this, and then I will have to go ahead and add the cape bit separately. I need to draft the coat bit first because in order to figure out most of all of this going on up here, I have to have these front and back pieces already drafted. A lovely viewer follower, I believe he's called Parker, he went through such great lengths to send me some fantastic research on these Ulster coats, old patterns from magazines and such, and I've been also cross-referencing these patterns with this. I've of course gone through and annotated and compared the diagrams, and there's some really interesting information here. This magazine actually tells you a lot about the fit and the seam placement of this Ulster coat, and of course the style of collar and pocket placement. What I've come to realize that just didn't occur to me is that the Ulster coats with this military cape thing don't have sleeves. I didn't think about that. It just occurred to me that a coat has sleeves, but I guess if it has a cape, it doesn't need to have sleeves. The cape sort of just acts as the sleeve bit. I thought that was just a funny little idiosyncrasy of this little diagram here, where the woman's wearing her cape and she hasn't got sleeves on it. But then of course I went back and I referenced that to this pattern, which is actually a different pattern, I think on a different page of this book or from a different book. And this one does not have sleeves, neither does this one. So I guess it's sort of the thing that the Ulster coat doesn't have sleeves, which is totally fine by me because as we all know, sleeves are the devil's work. It's interesting to have sort of worked my way up accidentally in difficulty, starting with the walking skirt, which was quite simple, moving on to the waistcoat, which was a bit more complex, and then finishing with the Ulster coat, which is the most complex of all of the things. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully it won't be too tragic, but you know what? No promises. We hope for the best. Okay, so I have tentatively completed the drafting for this Ulster coat. I say tentatively because there are things like this line that look very wonky, and I feel like this will definitely need a lot of alteration when we get into the mock-up, but that's what mock-ups are for. He actually did, in the instructions, he actually does address the fact that you cannot just cut out these pieces because you will end up destroying half of your skirt pieces. So what he advises to do, which is really helpful and is much less labor intensive than what I was planning to do, is he advises to take another sheet of paper, put it underneath this, and trace over it with a tracing wheel. Fancy that! I don't know why I didn't think of that. You know, that is sort of standard practice in sewing, is to trace things with a tracing wheel, not to tape things on massive windows. So yes, I have gone ahead and I have taped together a new sheet of newsprint that I will put underneath and trace those pieces off. Now, the other thing that has come to my attention, I did go through and transfer the Ulster coat notes to the basic jacket instruction notes. Now I'm confused because he does say, add full seams to this garment and ample cuffs to the sleeves, but do not make the latter quite so full at the top as for a jacket. So he is implying that this pattern does have sleeves. He does not give a sleeve pattern. He does not tell us how to draft that. There are sleeve patterns elsewhere in the book, so I'm assuming that he just wants us to go and take that and put those on here, but make them less full. So yes, perhaps Ulster coats could have sleeves, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm low-key a tiny bit disappointed because I was very much looking forward to not doing sleeves. Maybe they could go with or without sleeves. But at the same time, it could just be another issue of this magazine is giving you the pattern, but the sleeves were elsewhere in the content, and you were just expected to put the sleeves on separately. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go with what Mr. Keystone is telling me to do. I will add sleeves. reluctantly, I will add sleeves. So first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and get all of these pieces cut out. Then I will go ahead and I will have to draft the cape piece. I also have to draft a collar piece, which is also, again, elsewhere in this book. He gives two different collar options, a broad collar or a standing collar, both of which he says are in the book elsewhere. I will also have to draft the sleeves. Oh, and also I have to draft a pocket because this has got a little pocket. There are absolutely no instructions for this either here or in the Keystone Guide, so this is something that I will either have to do some research on or it looks fairly straightforward. It's just a shape. Okay, so we are about to get started on the cape bit. This feels fairly straightforward. It's just some straight lines and a couple of little things up here that sound simple enough to do, and then a big curve. So then I proceeded to draft the sleeves, which proved an entirely simple and actually rather delightful process. I guess their merry drafting process makes up for the fact that they become utter demons when you try and make them into three-dimensional objects, but you know. In case you're wondering, this bendy green thing I'm using to draft my longer and more irregular curves is called a flexi-curve. Basically, it bends into whatever curved shape you're trying to draw. It's very helpful, but also a bit of a temperamental creature to get used to, but as always, all my tools are listed down below, along with the relevant material sources, yardages, research information, and sundry such useful things. Do people actually read the description? Anyway, once again, he's having me draft the oversleeve and the undersleeve pieces on one grid, so I have to do our fancy little tracing trick again to separate the pieces. Okay, so I'm just about to start drafting the collar pattern. As you can see on this page, he's got quite a number of options. What's happening is basically I want to go for this collar piece because it's also slightly taller and has room to turn down. However, in order to get here, the instructions for this, as you can see, are basically like draw the lines from A to B, which are 2.5 inches. Draw the line from D to C, which is 2.5 inches, but it doesn't tell you how to get from B to C or from A to D. Basically, these colors are a sequence starting with, say this one, which is basically just a rectangle. This one adds a little swoop down here. This one looks like it's a bit wider with the swoop. So basically, I have to go back to diagram number, I think 58 is the one where he starts to actually explain this bit here. Basically, draft number 58, make the changes to get to 59, and then make further changes to get to diagram 60. So what I did actually, before I actually started all of this drafting, is I read the entire book through completely in the sequence that he'd written it, and that is a huge help. I highly recommend doing that if you are working extensively with one of these books, just so that you understand, you sort of get a layout of how things are presented and the development of the garments, because they are put in a certain order. So he starts with the basic body, the waist as it is, and then proceeds to, okay, but here's how you turn the waist into a jacket. Here's how you turn the waist into a coat. And on these jacket and coats, he doesn't necessarily go into the deepest amount of detail because he just did that earlier. I mean, the whole reason that I knew that the collars and the sleeves and the cape bits were on different pages was because I had gone through and read the book. So it's not like, oh, well, I guess this coat doesn't have a collar. I guess this coat doesn't have a cape. I already understood that these were explained elsewhere in the book, and I can go back and reference those. So yeah, read stuff. Definitely highly recommend that if you are using any source, any text as a reference, you go through and just read the whole thing back to front. I promise you will not regret it, because you will learn so much, not just about the content, about what's in the book, but you also learn a lot about the author and about the context in which they are writing. Even in just sort of a seemingly plain drafting book such as this Keystone Guide, you actually do pick up tiny little nuggets of like super important contextual information. Like, for example, he mentions somewhere in the beginning, I think it's on one of the first waist drafts, he references something about the average proportions, which is like 15 to 20 inches different between the waist and the hips, which is extraordinary, super important for us to know as people reconstructing the garments that these are meant to fit a body with a 15 to 20 inch difference between the waist and the hips, which of course brings up the whole issue of padding. But yeah, so you just get little interesting, tiny little, just essences of information that of course these people are writing about as if they're common knowledge, but to you, you're like, oh my goodness, this thing just makes so much sense. So yeah, anyway, I mean, my point is, read stuff, you will not ever regret it, I promise. Okay, so mock-up fitting number 1 for this overcoat, I got about yay far before I realized that I should probably have done this initial fitting without the cape, because I can't really see anything that's going on here. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this cape and do a proper fitting. However, let's just take a moment to behold the brilliant sleeve setting here. I don't know if you can see, but I think this is the outer like elbow seam that's right here, because you know, logic and stuff. I mean, there's just so much wrong with the sleeves in general. When I drafted the pattern, I initially added like 4 inches or something, and it's still like wildly too short. I added a little bit of, I mean, this is batting because I just had it there. I think what I may do is I may just rip them out, reset them in before I try anything, because why? I mean, I don't know if you can see, but it's like the elbow seam is right on the top of my arm. That's not logical at all. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that they are completely whack. The drafting guide did say it was supposed to fit very loosely. Depending on the wearer's taste, it could be more fitted or more loose. I may fit it just a little bit more. Is the same issue, is that there's just more room in the bust than I need. So fortunately, I think this is something that I can just take off center front here. I mean, I drafted this as a single-breasted coat, but I could just make it double and be done with it. I'm also having a couple of questions as to how this cape precisely is set in, because I've come to the realization that it can't exactly close up top here if the cape bits are kind of in the way. Yes, I shall have to have a little bit of an investigation and find out how that happens, whether it's set back a bit on one side or on both sides. Although I think for the thing I'm going to be wearing it open, because I've come to the realization that I probably did not need to make any of these undergarments, because I could have honestly just worn the coat closed and put on the hat, and everyone would have known what I was supposed to be. I want to show off my waistcoat, so I think I may wear it open like this. You know, like Sherlock in the Sherlock TV show, he's always got his coat like blowing in the breeze. That's the aesthetic, right? There's a lot going on in this upper shoulder area that needs to be solved. I can't really turn around very easily, but something horrendous is going on with the seams in the back just there, which is really unfortunate because I cannot reach those to fix them. What I think has to happen is I'm going to try just raising the arm's eye like half an inch and seeing if that solves some of the problems up here. I've also got some scooping in the neck that has to happen and get rid of some of these wrinkles up here. So this is going to require a little bit of playing around. What I do in a situation like this when I am here by my merry self and cannot reach something in the back is I just make a mental note, take off the mock-up, play around with the pattern a bit, try something random, put the mock-up back on, see if that worked, and it's just an endless process of trying stuff and putting it back on. It takes a while, it's time-consuming, but you get there eventually. The good news is, all of this will be covered with a cape, so does it really matter? No, but it does inhibit my movement a little bit. See, nowadays we're so used to cutting all of our arm size like way down here for some reason, which is really stupid because it actually inhibits our arm movement if you've got fabric here to here. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to our modern senses to raise the arm size. People think that's uncomfortable, but it actually gives you a lot more arm movement. So I think I've just cut the arm size a little bit too low here. I'm just gonna raise it a bit and we'll see if that does anything. Okay, so I ended up putting this on my dress form and playing around with the back of it because there's just absolutely no way. I did attempt to do this on myself and it just didn't happen because people don't bend like this. So this is fine. I think this will work. What I did is essentially the arm side just scooped a little bit too much, so it was creating this sort of dip here where there was just too much room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little slash on the pattern and just take out some of this room to make this top part a bit slimmer, and then I also just took out a little bit of room here. I think I may have taken out a little bit too much. I'll throw this on again in just a minute just to check and see, because mannequins don't have shoulder blades, but you know, humans tend to have those, so we do need a little bit of room across the back. In terms of other alterations that I made, I also took out a little bit for the sway back issue here. If you missed my corset making progress video, basically I have a sway back, which is where my spine sort of dips in. It's very common, a lot of people have sway back, so if you have sway back, I've been finding with these projects that it does wonders just to take a little bit of a dip out in the lower back area. It just makes the fit so much nicer, so highly recommend doing that if you've got sway back. I also took in a little bit more in the darts up here because I'm not quite so full in the bust as an 1890s lady was. I also took a little bit out of the side seam because I did decide to just make it a little bit more fitted. Not that it matters because there will be a cape covering this whole upper body waist area anyway, but you know what? What I also did is I marked out the points on the sleeves where stuff has to happen. Basically, I marked where my elbow was, which is way down here, and the elbow of the sleeve is here. I marked a point sort of on my bicep level where things are fairly straight on the sleeve. This will be my slush point, so I will cut the sleeve here, and I will just add whatever it is, 2.5 or 3 inches to get this point down to here. So first I'm just marking all of my new seam lines with pencil so that I can cut apart the mock-up along the seam lines to obtain the new pattern shapes. I can then lay these corrected shapes onto the old pattern to mark out the new changes and cut the pattern pieces into the corrected shapes. Sometimes this involves slashing the panels to move them closer together, taking some fullness out of spots that had too much room, like in that back panel, or adding more room, like in the sleeve. Once we have pieces that will maybe actually work, we can get to cutting out the real coat. Fasten your seatbelt, friend, because there is a lot of cutting ahead. Since I'm using a wool tartan for this, I'm cutting all the pieces single, that is, with the fabric laid flat rather than doubled up, so that I can do my best to strategically match the pattern from one panel to the next. The lining of the coat is cut from this brown cotton silesia, which you may remember from the waistcoat video, but is basically a glazed lightweight cotton that was commonly used for garment linings in the 19th century. The sleeves, however, will be lined with some of this brown silk that Noelle, my Lady Watson, sent to me. The silk is much less frictiony than the cotton, so will allow the arms to slide more easily in and out of the coat. The coat also gets some Tailor's canvas put into the front panels and the collar pieces to stiffen them a bit. So I'm cutting out 2 of each collar piece as well as 2 of the first circa 4 inches of the front panel pieces. Speaking of facings, I forgot to cut this out of the wool a minute ago, so I will also need a front facing piece out of the wool to turn back into the lining and finish that center front edge. Finally, the cape part gets a very special lining of its own, since this will probably be seen. I've just found this nice silk tartan in the garment district that I think goes well enough with the greens in the cape, so I'm just cutting both cape pieces out of this. Silks today tend to be a bit shorter in width, just as they were historically, and so it turns out that my silk wasn't quite wide enough to accommodate the entire cape, which theoretically also would have been the case in the 19th century. So I ended up tracing off that appendage bit separately and piecing it on, which is perfectly acceptable in historical dressmaking, so therefore it is perfectly acceptable to me. Once all of the cutting is finished, I can go ahead and start pinning all the coat panels of both the lining and fabric layers together. And before I can get the cape put together, I first have to get those piecings attached, which made for a very annoying outcome, but piecing is period, and cross-grain piecing is also period. It's fine. It's on the back of the cape lining. No one's going to see it, except the whole internet, but that's fine. If anyone comes up to me at costume college asking to see the back lining of my cape, who even are you? And everything gets stitched together. Items stitched include 4 sleeves, each with 2 seams, shoulder darts on both outer and lining capes, as well as piecings and center back seams on both collar layers, as well as the canvas stiffening layer, coat layer, 10 seams and 2 darts, plus corresponding coat lining layer, and shoulder seams for both. All this done on a hand-turned machine, so yes, this literally did take 5 hours. But wait! There's more! I'm now just attaching the front-facing pieces, which will fold over and inside the coat to strengthen the front and finish the center front edge. I'm also catching that canvas-facing piece in this seam as well, just for that extra bit of added strength. This is, once again, stitched. But wait! There's more! All of these seams now need to be pressed so that they lay nice and flat. This also took roughly an eternity, but pressing is always a worthy time investment, so definitely necessary. All I can say is thank goodness for lining, because I cannot even fathom having to overcast or fell all of these seams. Now that we have the basis of the coat, I then decided to get the collar together. I'm just pad stitching the stiffening canvas to the underside of the collar piece, which is done with those small permanent pad stitches instead of the larger basting ones that come out eventually. These will just help to keep that canvas secured into place, and will also help me to give the collar a little bit of shape. And with that done, I can pin the top layer of the collar onto my stiffened layer with right sides together. That is, right sides, ma'am? When the collar was correctly pinned, I could then go over my outer seam lines with a backstitch to secure the layers together. This theoretically could have been done by machine, but at this point I had taken the coat to England and didn't have one of the correct period at my disposal, so handwork it was, which is honestly never a disappointment for me. This bit of backstitching only took maybe half an hour. And then once I've turned the collar out, I'm then going over the edges with a little top stitch, done once again by hand and about half an inch in from the edge. Then I can address the cape. I'm first just turning up the raw edges on the center fronts and hem, basting them down and pressing the edge nice and flat. Then I can lay the lining over that wrong side, fold under the raw edges of the silk, and pin everything into place. These folded edges are secured into place with tiny, neat felling stitches. With the cape in one piece, I'm then just going ahead and putting in a row of top stitching at half an inch along the center front edges of the coat. And now it is time to venture into sleevel hell. Since these sleeves are cut on curves, I'm just clipping into these curved areas at the elbows so that they bend a little bit nicer, and running a quick gathering thread across the top of the sleeve head so that I can gather up some of the fullness more easily. The sleeves are backstitched in by hand because sleeves are stressful enough without adding sewing machines to the equation. The sleeves do not look completely like trash. We are on the right track. Here is where I am so far. According to what I read, these coats could have a little bit of extra room. They didn't necessarily have to be super fitted. I did put a little bit of fitting into it because this is like 5 yards of wool. If you don't fit it at the waist, you have to carry all of that at your shoulders, and if you wear the coat for a long time, it gets really heavy. So I wanted to put a little bit of fitting just in at the waist, but it's still, as you can see, it's got quite a lot of room in it. So it's really comfortable. It's cut with this flare, this sort of hip spring, as you will, that is the term. This sleeve should probably come up a little bit and fit closer to my body. Oh, look how much better that looks. You won't see any of this. This all gets covered with the cape. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and try and figure out right now. Also, I just have to point out that I'm very, very much in love with the length of these sleeves. Sleeves on me are just perpetually always too short. This isn't historically accurate, but I may just keep it because I love it so much. What I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go ahead and make up the cape bit separately and then put it onto the coat. So I'm going to attach this collar bit. It's not attached right now, that's why I'm holding it. And then figure out how this whole center front closure thing works. We are on our way with this. This is what we are looking at so far. I mean, none of this really technically matters, none of this closure funny business bit, because I will be wearing the coat open so that you can actually see the rest of the work that I spent the last 6 months working on. So I'm going to go work on that now, and then, I mean, obviously this whole thing needs a massive press. Onward. Okay, so this has been done. I have pinned the cape onto the coat, and we've got this little 1-inch gap in the front. I hope this is indeed what I'm supposed to be doing, although now we are venturing back into that territory of mysterious tailoring techniques that I vaguely but don't really know how to do. So we shall see how this goes, and hopefully I don't ruin the whole thing, but you know, isn't that how we all feel with sewing? So I'm going to go ahead and attach all of these layers together. Once again, I'm going to do this by hand because there are just so many layers here. She is thick, as the young folk say, which means that I think we may actually be done with machine work for this project and the rest of it gets done by hand. Okay, cool. I mean, I'm always down for that. I think I'm going to do this with a backstitch, or I may cheat and do a running stitch or a running backstitch. I don't know. Behold the B-roll that will be running over top of this to see what I'm actually doing. Yes, indeed, I am backstitching, thanks. Now it is time to address the all-important pocket. I'm not going to lie, I definitely sized this to be able to accommodate my phone, since that's probably what I'll be carrying mostly when I wear this coat in real life, and the original draft didn't give specific dimensions for the pocket. But otherwise, I did use the draft to reference the rough shape, scale, and placement on the coat. I could then cut the pocket piece out of some cabbage, as well as the pocket flap, which is cut with an additional 1.5 inches of seam allowance at the top to allow for some turning and folding above the actual pocket, which I shall demonstrate hopefully more clearly anon. I'm going to line the pocket flap with a little bit of the silk tartan, so I'm also cutting a flap piece from this. Back to the actual pocket, I'm first just pinning down that top inch of facing bit to form the top edge of the pocket. This is pressed nice and flat along with all the seam allowance around the rest of the pocket. This is why this type of pocket is called a patch pocket, because it literally goes on just like a patch but is left open at the top edge for like holding stuff. The flat pieces are attached, right sides together, and stitched all around the outer curved edge with a quick running back stitch. Yes, again, this could have been done by machine, but honestly, my needle was right here and it would only take a minute to do by hand. And before I turn the pieces out, I'm first just trimming down the seam allowance to about 1/4 inch so that there's a bit less bulk in the edge. This again is pressed nice and flat, then I'm just going around the edge with a little top stitch so that it matches nicely with the rest of the coat. And I'm just quickly covering a little button to go in the pocket and hold that flap down. I've marked the center front of the pocket flap and the width I want the buttonhole to be so that I can go ahead and put in a little buttonhole here. I realized that my color options for silk buttonhole twist were black, white, and red, so obviously I decided it would be nice to make a statement with the red. Also, like, we can't not have the red. Once again, I do have a video detailing the buttonhole stitch more specifically, so I'll put that on the screen if you require that information. Okay, so I have pinned the pocket onto the coat where I think it is supposed to go. I put the coat on myself and did it sort of by eye. There's only one on one side as according to the image, so I don't have to worry about things being exactly symmetrical. The reference diagrams do show the pocket sort of sitting at a slight angle. I'm not sure if this is quite angled enough. It doesn't really look so angled here while it's lying flat, but what I have to do now is I have to just top stitch this down, which I think once again I'm going to do by hand, probably with a back stitch, because if this has to hold weight then it's got to be strong. And then after that I can go ahead and get this pocket flap on, which will sit, I mean, there's a little trick to it, but it just sort of folds over like this. And then it will have its button, and then it will be finished. Once again, I'm just going to do this by hand with a back stitch probably, because if this has to hold weight, then it will probably need something a little bit stronger than a running stitch, and I will just be stitching this right to the top layer of the coat. I will have to avoid this front facing whilst I'm stitching this, so yeah. Next, I'm just tucking in those raw edges on the pocket flap and pinning it onto the coat above the pocket patch, like so. This is back-stitched into place, catching the pocket flap, lining, and coat layers, and pressed into its proper flap position. This is then top-stitched into place, and at last, the button is attached. Now to pin the lining in, turn up the hem, and pin the hem lining into place. This is all secured into place, once again, with tiny felling stitches. The same is done with the sleeve cuffs. The edges are turned under and then felled into place. Okay, so I do not think about this at all in the fact that when the lining goes over all of these seams, it doesn't hide all of this. You may or may not have seen, I actually have a long red cape
that does sort of this exact same collar thing. I went and had a look at that. These edges are finished separately. Obviously, this cape is not a late 19th century garment, is not late 19th century construction, but it is a way to solve this problem. So I think what I'm going to do is, after I've turned under these edges, I'm just going to go over the edge of it with a little felling stitch just to make sure that it's nice and secure on that edge, and then I will go in and put in another little row of top stitching just at this 1/2 inch mark inside here, just so that it matches the center front edge a little bit better. And hopefully that will clean everything up nicely. And then of course I can go ahead and finish up the lining bit and get all of that sorted out, and then hopefully this will all look a little bit nicer. And at last, the coat is finished off by putting in the buttonholes down center front, 9 of them according to the illustration, and attaching the corresponding buttons, once again also covered with some of the tweed. And thus, my friend, the coat, and subsequently the entirety of Lady Sherlock, is complete on the 30th of June, totaling a solid 6 months of labor. 6 months, though, to complete 6 smaller projects that don't just form a pretty costume that I'll wear for one evening and maybe a photo shoot for the Instagram, but that are actual, real garments that you will most definitely see me wearing in future stuff, because yay for practicality. But anyway, I'll be putting together a little feature compilation of the entire Lady Sherlock project and all of the layers together, so that is still to come. Meanwhile, other project plans are afoot, so stay tuned for that, I suppose.